But he said, listen, somewhere in the world right now, someone's having the worst day of their life. Somewhere else in the world, someone's having the best day of their life. So when you really think about it, the day is neither objectively good or bad. It's the perspective that you bring to the day that determines whether it's good or bad for you.
Welcome to Racking Up Rentals, a show about how regular people, those of us without huge war chests of capital or insider connections, can build lasting wealth acquiring a portfolio of buy and hold real estate. But we don't just go mainstream looking at what's on the market and asking banks for loans, nor are we posting "we buy houses" signs or just looking for, quote, motivated sellers to make lowball offers to. You see, we are people-oriented deal makers. We sit down directly with sellers to work out win-win deals without agents or any other obstacles and buy properties nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. If you're the kind of real estate investor who wants long-term wealth, not get-rich-quick gimmicks or pictures of yourself holding fat checks on social media, this show is for you. Join me and quietly become the wealthiest person on your block. Now let's go rack up a rental portfolio. Hey, thanks for joining me for another episode of Racking Up Rentals. Show notes for this episode can be found at thoughtfulre.com/E115. Please do us a big favor and do yourself a big favor by hitting that subscribe button in your podcast app. It really helps fellow thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs to find the show. Onward with today's episode. And in today's episode, I'm really pleased to share just such a cool conversation and interview I had with my new friend, Jeffrey Holst. Jeff and I met via Facebook groups and both being involved in real estate conversations. And even the way we met and what happened immediately was so interesting and just defined thoughtfulness to me that I was really inspired to continue to learn more about Jeff. And so as we've talked more and more, we just realized he's got so much perspective to share with people. Knowledge and insights, yes, but perspective is the thing that I just find myself getting so much out of my conversations with Jeff. And so I'm so excited to share this with you. This is truly a one-of-a-kind conversation as far as I'm concerned, and I know you are going to get so much out of it as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into my conversation with Jeffrey Holst. Jeff is the host of the Old Fashioned Real Estate podcast and Last Life Ever podcasts. All right, Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited. It's been great getting to know you the last few weeks here. So
I agree.
Yeah. So listen, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I think that, that will give people an idea of what I'm about. So, I'm Jeffrey Holst. I'm a multifamily real estate investor, but I actually don't like defining myself as a real estate investor. I don't really like defining myself in general. I like to be a little bit more eclectic about how I live my life. If you really push me to define myself, what I would say is my goal is to be the most interesting man in the world. So that's really the goal. Like I just, I try to make decisions based on that sort of mental framework. And for me, that's about living the best possible version of my life, which means I'm going to do charity. I'm going to help people. I'm going to add value to the world wherever I can. And if I do that, then I feel that the universe sort of rewards us for adding value. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be like, sort of spiritual or foofy or however you want to look at it. It can be it can really be a function of looking at capitalism and say, like, the more value you add to the market, the more money you're going to get back. And I think that's true, not just in capitalism, but it's true in life in general. If you add value to people's life, they're going to add value back to you. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah. So when I love the goal of being the most interesting man alive. When you do your self-assessment, like how you doing on that? Like give yourself a score of 1 to 10 right now.
Oh, like 0.1. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not that interesting. Although I did actually have this guy at a bank the other day say to me, you might be the most interesting man in the world. And I never told him this. And I was like, that's so awesome. Like, I'm really doing well. So maybe like a 5.
Okay.
I'm getting there. I've done a lot of really fun things in the last, few years. And I've done things like start charities and stuff. So, and I've got a couple of podcasts that I run that I think really help people. So I feel like I'm really like leaning into this strategy, but it's a work in progress. I had this coach for a while who said that integrity is like the most important value for people. Like you should just constantly work on living in integrity with your own personal values, with what you think is important. But then the part that really stuck out to me was that he said integrity is like a mountain with no top. You just keep working at it. You keep climbing a little bit hard, a little bit higher. And you might think you see the summit and then you get there and you're like, oh, whoops, that's actually just a little peak. There's another peak up there higher. And you might not see the next peak until you get through that next one. So, so I think that's kind of the same thing with being the most interesting man in the world. Like, there've probably been some people that have been alive that have been more interesting than me. But also like, I have to be careful with that too, because it's a little facetious tongue in cheek, right? Serial killers are really interesting, but I don't want to be a serial killer. So like, I have to live in line with what that means to me. And so that's how I think about it.
Yeah. So I want to back up for a second and sort of let the listeners in on just sort of how we connected really in the last few weeks. I think we've been officially, technologically connected on Facebook for a while, but we didn't really, know each other. But then we were exchanging comments on something recently, and that prompted you to say, "Hey, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to send you a video about my life." And you sent me this video, and I actually don't want to like give away the whole video, because with your permission, I'd love to put it in the show notes.
Oh yeah, for sure. Share it.
That's just the fact that you sent me the video. And then when I watched the video, it just felt like this very artful kind of way of communicating. And it just immediately struck me as being very, very, very thoughtful. I know we're going to touch on stuff that shows up in the video today. And I hope people will go watch it. But one of the things you said in the video that actually right before I hit the record button, you referenced it again, that I want to start here. I think I love this. You said in the video, and I think I'm quoting correctly, I gave up bad days a long time ago.
I don't know if I said it exactly like that, because I like that video. By the way, if you want one made, I'll tell you how. It was stupid easy. Like these guys, virtual assistant people, they just interviewed me for a half hour and cut it down to a video. Like that was it. I mean, it took me like a half hour, so it was pretty awesome. And I haven't really watched it too much since then, so I can't comment on the quoting. But yeah, I mean, listen, the sum of it is that when I was 17, I gave up bad days. And people say to me all the time, like, well, how can you give up bad days? That doesn't make sense. Like bad stuff's going to happen to you. And then it's like, yeah, absolutely. That is true. Good and bad stuff happens to me every day, just like it happens to everyone else every single day. But same coach that was telling me about integrity actually clarified this for me. I didn't actually know how it worked, but he said, listen, somewhere in the world right now, someone's having the worst day of their life. Somewhere else in the world, someone's having the best day of their life. So when you really think about it, the day is neither objectively good or bad. It's the perspective that you bring to the day that determines whether it's good or bad for you. So when I thought about that, I went, yeah, that's exactly how it works, right? So when I was 17, I was I hesitate to say suicidal because it doesn't seem right to me, but like I broke up with my girlfriend. My parents were going through a divorce. I was in a bad spot and I went into the bathroom. I don't even think I put this in the video, so you may not know this, but I put a knife on my wrist and it was a serrated blade, right? And I said, man, that kind of hurts. I don't know if I want to do this, right? Like, so, but I never told anyone about it for years. So it wasn't like a cry for help. It was literally like, I just was in this bad spot. And like I said, I don't think it was pure depression. I think it was more like teenage angst in retrospect. And if people are depressed, they should definitely consult professionals. I'm not, this is not a magic trick, right? But I took that knife and I set it aside and I looked in the mirror and I said, this is really kind of dumb. Like I'm, 17 and I live in a middle class family in a nice suburb in the United States of America. Like, how bad can my life be? I'm healthy and young, and we're rich. Like, relatively speaking, we weren't like super wealthy, but compared to people in like the third world, we're insanely rich. Like, the poorest people in this country are insanely rich compared to them. And so I just went, today's a good day. And I walked out of the bathroom and I threw the knife in the sink, and I thought, yeah, I mean, today's a good day. I'm gonna make today a good day. And it didn't actually work. Like, that next day wasn't like a perfect day. But I was stubborn. This is in the mid 90s, like 95, 96, somewhere around there. And so we didn't have YouTube because Google hadn't been invented yet. And so I couldn't like watch things on YouTube to help me. I just went, today's a good day, and it didn't work. So then the next day I was like, well, I just got to lean into this, and I have to say today's a good day, like, all the time. So I just kind of went, like, every time I saw a mirror, if I was by myself, I said today's a good day out loud over and over again. And I just created all these trigger points to where I was saying this like hundreds of times a day. Now we know this is a mantra, affirmation, but I never even heard of those things then. I just did it. Right. Yeah. And one day I walked into a 7-Eleven, and the guy behind the counter says, "How you doing today?" And I go, "I never have bad days." And then I literally went, holy, crap. I never have bad days. Like, it dawned on me as I was saying it that it had been a few months since I had a bad day. Like, I don't know exactly what day it started, right? The streak, but I was 17 when I started saying that. And I was 17 when I walked into the 7-Eleven, and I haven't had a bad day since. So 26 years of no bad days. Yeah. And it's really not that hard. It's actually easier to have good days than bad days.
Yeah. Have you ever found yourself really tested?
Oh yeah. There's some days are harder than others, right? Like I said, good and bad stuff happens every day. Like today, maybe I'll stub my toe. That's bad, but it's not, testing, right? Like, that's like, ouch. And then you move on. Mm-hmm. There's this thing, before I tell you about the hardest part, right? The hardest days, there's a couple that stand out that were really difficult. I'll tell you that it gets easier over time, right? If some of the stuff that I went through when I was 17, it would have ruined my day. I know this. Like, it's not like 1 week into saying today's a good day, you're going to be, perfectly aware of how to do this. You've got to develop. It's like a muscle. It's like going to the gym. Yeah. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. Tony Robbins calls it the reticular activating system. Yeah. The idea is your brain sort of defaults to the familiar, right? So the longer you have of having good days, the easier it becomes. And there's actual science behind this. There's this thing called the Bader-Meinhof effect, which is essentially like when you get a new car and then all of a sudden it seems like everyone has that new car. It's your mind defaulting to the familiar. But there's also this, and I wish I could remember the guy's name. I should really memorize this guy's name. There's this PhD that wrote a book called Hardwiring Happiness. I really like this. I think it was Bruce something, but any which way. The idea is your brain neurons, your neural pathways in your brain, the more you use them, the more they repeat themselves. So if you sort of embrace happiness over and over and over again, your brain becomes better and better at seeing happiness. It's the same thing as the Bader-Meinhof effect, but it's like from a neuroscience perspective, right? Yeah. As opposed to a psychology perspective. So it actually like physically rewires your brain. And what he says is like, if you walk outside and like the sun hits your face, like instead of being like, oh, that's nice, stop for a second and think, this is really nice. Because like that extra couple of seconds tilts the balance over time. And if you do that over and over again, you get to the point where you're like really, really good at seeing positive stuff. And then, of course, if you're better at seeing positive than negative, it becomes really easy to see positive versus negative. So when the bad stuff happens, you stub your toe and you go, I didn't break my toe. It could have been so much worse. Or you try to start your car and it doesn't start and you go, I'm so glad that mechanics exist, right? Instead of like, oh man, my day's ruined. And that really is how it works. Because if you think back to my coach, Jamil, who said, like somebody's having a good day, someone's having a bad day. Like it's all about perspective. So this is a very long way to answer your question about like days that challenged me. So I apologize for that. But in 2008. I had this thing, and I don't even think this is in the video either. For whatever reason, when I was in high school, I always told people I would die at 30. I just was like, I'm going to die at 30.
Wow.
Right. I don't know why I thought that. I just believed it. And so I lived my early part of my life with this philosophy that, I was probably not going to live very long. So I needed to do really cool and interesting things, which, is actually a good way to live your life. I mean, don't tell yourself you're going to die at 30, but tell yourself, I might die at 30, I might die at 25, whatever it is, right? If you're 40, obviously you're not dying at 30, but say, hey, I might have 5 years left. I might have 2 years left. And you can go, if you found out that you had 10 years left, what would you spend your time on? Mm-hmm. And then if you really want to get profound, well, what if you only had 5 years left, and think about that. And then, what if you only had 1 year left, right? Would that change what you spent your time on? If you knew for sure you had 1 year left or 1 week left, right? 1 day left, right? So if you start thinking like that, it impacts your ability. So there's actually some real value to that. But it is morbid to think you're definitely going to die at 30 when you're 17 or 18 years old. That's what I did. And then so flash forward to when I'm 30, it's 2008. I'm a bankruptcy attorney. I was busy because it was 2008 and there was a lot of bankruptcies and stuff like that happening at that time. And I had this short bucket list that I had created. And one of the last things on that was to go to Machu Picchu in Peru. So I go to Peru and I'm looking down, at the lost city, the Incan ruins. And I'm thinking, everything is so good in my life. I've done everything on my bucket list. And I have this law practice that's thriving. And I mean, it was just really good. And I was 30 and I thought I was going to die before I turned 30. So I was like, now I'm on bonus time. But something was a little bit off and I didn't know what it was. And I came off the mountain and I called my voicemail because we didn't have international phone plans then. And I listened to the voicemail and I had this attorney that worked for me and he actually put in his 2-week notice and I was going to be gone for another 6 or 7 days. So I was going to have a week to figure out a replacement when I got back. And I was like, well, I'll just have to work a little harder. Right. And I got home and I was sick. I didn't feel well. So I was like, this is great. Now I've got pneumonia and I'm tired and I'm down an attorney. So I'm down from 2 to 1 and I go to the med center on a Saturday and, it was 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. I go to the med center and I'd gone a couple of days before that. They gave me antibiotics and I wasn't getting better. And I'm like, you guys got to figure it out. I've got this weird bruise on me. I don't know where it came from. Maybe I picked up a parasite in the rainforest. I don't know, but something's wrong. So they go and do blood work. Right. And then they send me home and they're like, we'll let you know. And I get a call at 10 o'clock at night. Right. And this is to answer your question. This is a challenging day. The doctor says to me, hey, there's no easy way to tell you this, but you have leukemia and you have to go to the hospital right now. And so that's a tough day, right? And so I did the dumbest thing that you can possibly do when you find out you have leukemia. And I got in the car to go to the hospital. Actually, there was a little bit more to it. I told my wife and then, we were upset and then her dad came over and everyone was crying and all that stuff was happening. Right. But eventually we left to go to the hospital. It's about 11 o'clock at night on the Saturday. And I start calling everyone I know practically hey, mom, I have leukemia. I don't know anything. So I'll give you some more info later and then hang up and then call my brother and my dad and my sister and my friends. And, that was shock, right? I was in shock, no doubt. That's not a normal response. You shouldn't tell people stuff like that until you know a little bit more. But what happened is all of these people thought that I only called them, right? And so they all start showing up at the emergency room. So we're in this little tiny room and there's a dozen people there. And one of them is my dad. And he says something like, if you live till February, this is in September, if you live till February, I'll take you to Australia. And I'm just going, I just hope I make it till Christmas. Like my white blood cell count's 250,000. I don't know much about leukemia at this point. I know a lot more now, having gone through this, right? Yeah. But I did know that one of my cousins had died of a different type of leukemia, and her white blood cell count had got up to 150,000. So I was like way worse than her. And that was when she died, right? So I was like, I'm not making it till February. Like that's not happening. So I had this moment where it was like, whoa, like, you know what? You're 30 and you were right. You actually are going to die at 30. Right. And, maybe I manifested that. I don't know. Right. Yeah. But I had this acceptance of the fact that I was going to die. And that's challenging. Like recognizing you're going to die at a time when you really don't want to die, when your life's going pretty well, right? Like you have a thriving law practice and you've been able to travel to all these really great places, and you have, your dogs and your house in the suburbs and your wife, and you're happy and you're planning a future, right? And my brother, bless him, I love him, but this might not have been the right strategy at the time. He was super young then, so we'll give him a pass. But he says to me, still that same night, I bet today's a bad day. Like almost like he wants to prove it's not possible to never have bad days. And that's actually a typical response. When I tell people I never have bad days, they go, one response is, wow, that must be nice. And it is nice. The second response is, I wish that could happen to me. I love it when people say that because they can do it and I can explain to them how to do it. And then the third one is, you're lying. You're deceiving yourself or you're lying. And that's kind of my brother's reaction at the time, is like, yeah, see, I knew it wasn't possible, And I was kind of like, actually, not too bad. Like I didn't get diagnosed until 10 o'clock at night because my mind was like, let's look at the positives. All these people show up that love me, right? I didn't get diagnosed until 10 o'clock at night. So most of the day was actually pretty good, right? Hang out with my wife. She had the day off. We watched some TV. We went swimming in the pool, actually, which was like the last day of the year for the season before we covered it. And so it was actually a pretty good day. And one person would say like, well, yeah, I mean, those are normal good things. And then you have this really bad thing happen and that outweighs it all. But the thing is, it didn't for me. Yeah. And that's what mattered, right? It's the perspective. Yeah. So that was a tough day. The next day was even worse though. Because the next day I couldn't say, well, 22 hours of not having leukemia and 2 hours of having leukemia. It's all 100% of the day having leukemia. Yeah. And I struggled a little bit that day. That was probably one of the harder days that I ever had to deal with. I sent my wife home. She had been up all night. I sent her home to sleep. And I was sitting in the hospital room by myself thinking about this, going, man, I really don't want to die. Like, it was one thing when I was 17 to say I was going to die at 30, but when you're 30, it doesn't sound as good, right? And so I sat there and I thought, man, I really got to figure this out. And I'm like, I was struggling a little. And it was about 2:00 in the afternoon. And there was a shift change, and this nurse comes in and she looks at me and she says, oh my God, Jeff, I'm so sorry to see you here. And I went, oh my God, Shelly, I'm so happy to be here. And she was like, you're insane, right? But I was literally like filled with joy to see her. And the reason was she was one of my favorite babysitters from when I was like 7 years old. And I hadn't seen her in a decade or more, right? Yeah. I think I saw her at Costco once from when I was 10 until then, right? Wow. So like in 20 years, I'd seen her one time. And I was just like, I'm so happy to see her that like my whole day felt better instantly. Right. And people would say to me later, when I tell this story, they go, well, sure. Like you were happy to see your babysitter. That's cool. But you also had leukemia and that's worse, right? Like if you're weighing these things, one's worse than the other. And I say, no, that's not true. And I really believe it's not true because I didn't feel it at the time. And again, perspective matters. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, that was probably the best day of my life. Like, because if I didn't have leukemia, I'd still be practicing law. And I didn't really like practicing law. I was doing it to make money. I decided to become a lawyer because I wanted to travel. And I said things like, someday I'll invest in real estate, because I really love real estate. And I knew it when I was a kid. I would sneak out at night and watch like Carlton Sheets No Money Down stuff. Like 15-year-old kids usually sneak out to watch like some nefarious stuff. I snuck out of my bedroom to watch like infomercials about real estate, right? And I mean, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad the second it came out. I'm one of these people that obsessed on real estate, and we didn't have podcasts then, but I bought Carlton Sheets' program and I read every book I could find on real estate, and I wanted to meet people that were buying real estate, and I looked at real estate online, but I never bought any real estate, right? I always went, someday I'll have money to invest in real estate. And when I got sick with leukemia, I went, someday may never come. Like, I said that I lived my life believing I was going to die at 30, but I didn't really believe I was going to die at 30. It was not until I actually was dying at 30 that I believed I was going to die at 30. And once I did that, I went, I got to change everything. Like, I got to figure this out. Like, first of all, if I die and I can't work, like, I need money for my wife. Like, I got to take care of her. So that was a big motivator. And, this stuff, it forced me, a bankruptcy attorney, into personal bankruptcy, because I wasn't prepared, because I didn't make the right decisions before I got sick. But now I don't have to worry about anything. Like, if I die right now, my wife's fine forever. I know it for sure. Right. My business is set up that if I never paid attention to it again, I would be fine forever. Right. I have hundreds of units of apartments, and like, not like syndicated apartments where I own 1% of them. I mean, like, I own like a third or half, like it's a small partnership, but they're set up in a way that my partners' businesses run them for me, and I really don't have to pay any attention. And I mean, it's an amazing way to live, and it would have never, ever, ever happened had I not gotten sick. So when I was saying today's a good day and people were like, that can't be true, but I felt it, not only was I feeling it, and so it was true, but it actually, in retrospect, is really, honestly, one of the best things that ever could have happened to me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's amazing. Something I've been thinking about lately is, just to riff on what you were saying, is that I was thinking philosophically about it. There's like 3 levels of things that happen. There's the thing that happens, which is just a thing that happens. It's not intrinsically good, bad. It's just a thing that happens.
Yeah.
The second thing is how is the label we put on it. Like, that was bad, that was good. So that's our perspective. But then the third thing is how we choose to respond to the label that we put on it. Right. So, and I've, I remember feeling this way, like when a few years ago, actually almost 5 years ago to the day. Oh, you and I talked about this before. My dog died too early, and it really wrecked me. And as I went outside and like took a walk or went to the store, I was so struck by the fact that, like, oh, everything around me is happening totally normal. Like, look at all these people carrying on with their lives. Don't they realize, that my dog has died? And it was such a reminder that, like, the fact that he died was a thing that happened. But me labeling it as bad was a choice. And then how I responded to that label was also a choice. And so I think that's, to me, like, what I kind of take away from I don't have bad days. It's like, I have days, things happen in those days. I can label them however I want, and then I can react to however I want to label them.
Yeah.
But most of that's decision-making, right?
Oh, it's all decision-making, really. I mean, except for what happens, right? Like, so I also like to, going in line with what you're saying, I like to embrace something I think of as like radical responsibility. And the idea is to take 100% responsibility for everything, right? If you get leukemia, it's not your fault, but that doesn't mean you can't be responsible for it. Responsibility is about looking at the cards you're dealt and then playing them the best possible way. Right. Hal Elrod has this quote that I love, the Miracle Morning guy. It says, the moment you take 100% responsibility for everything in your life is the moment you can change anything in your life. Right. You can't change something if you don't take responsibility for it. And again, it's not about fault. It's about making that choice to respond. And when you talk about your 3 different levels, right, that's really what you're saying. You're saying, look, this stuff happens. My fault, not my fault, doesn't matter, but it happens. And then I get to label it how I want. That's taking the first step towards being responsible for it, right? I recognize that I get to choose how I perceive this thing. And then the second step after that, or really your third step, is saying, okay, now what am I going to do about it? Buddha has this thing, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but I really like it, even though I'm not Buddhist. He says, like, when you're thinking about worrying, you shouldn't worry about anything, because there's only two possible things, right? Like, one, you can't do anything about it, right? Like, whatever this thing that you're worried about that's going to happen, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, if that's the case, there's no point in worrying about it, right? Or the other possibility is, whatever this thing you're worried about, you can do something about it. And if that's the case, you're way better off just to do that thing about it to prevent it from happening. So either way, worrying doesn't help you, right? It's a distraction. So don't worry. Just like, either recognize that you have no control over it and then just ignore it, because it doesn't do any good to worry about it. Or if you do have control over it, go do that thing, whatever it is that minimizes the consequences of the thing you're worried about, rather than worrying about it. And I think that's the same concept as taking responsibility for whatever you're dealt.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the antonym, the opposite of radical responsibility is basically victim mentality, right? And I think that once I kind of started tuning, or let's say I programmed my reticular activator to spot victim mentality around me, or especially when I was doing it, but I started seeing it in other people. It's like, oh my gosh, it is everywhere. Like, it's everywhere all the time. And just like, it could be like just some subtle little thing somebody says that's like a clue to, like, oh yeah, they feel like this thing happened to them, kind of, rather than they have any role in it or any ability to control their feelings about it.
For me, I had a guy I worked with for a number of years who was very successful early in his career. And he started a business, and then it didn't work out. Timing was off. He felt like people took advantage of him. The economy was unfair, all this stuff. And he was about, like, when I worked with him, he was in his mid 50s, and, still had great credit. He still was making good money, but he constantly would say things like, well, I could have been so much further ahead, but now I'm too old to, like, turn it around, and he just, like, got progressively more and more depressed. And I really like the guy. Like, he's a really good guy, still keep in contact with him. But when I talk to him, every time I come away feeling, like, so sad that it's hard for me to even deal with him sometimes. Because the thing is, like, if you sit around and just blame things, and you never, like, take any responsibility for it, which, like you said, the opposite of radical responsibility is just, it's always someone else's fault, then you're never going to change. Like how Elrod said, right? Like, you, as soon as you take responsibility, you can change it. Well, if you don't take responsibility, then there's nothing you can do about it. If there's nothing you can do about it, then there's nothing you can do to make your life better. And I just don't want to live that way. And I don't want to be around people that live in a world where they believe that whatever happened to them is outside of their control and there's nothing they can do. And the people that inspire me the most are people that have overcome really hard things. Yeah. Right? Like, I always tell my story, and then people are like, it's so inspirational. And I think, it's not really that inspirational. It's just something I did. Like, I got cancer and I had a choice. I could either, like, blame the world and go die in a corner, or I could, like, keep living and figure out how to get through it. Right.
Yeah.
It seems like a really, like, for a while, like, when people would be like, oh, you're a fighter, I'd be like, that's BS. Like, I'm not a fighter. Like if you get cancer, you have a choice. You can either seek treatment or not. Like, you're not a fighter. Like, you either go fix it if you can, or you don't. Like, it's just bad luck that you have cancer, if you really want to be honest about it. But you can take responsibility for it, and if you do, you can get through it. And that's what I did. I mean, when I got first diagnosed, I went and sought out the best doctors in the world, and I don't mean that facetiously. Like, I made friends with a guy who ran the lab at the Mayo Clinic that tested for the type of cancer I have. Right, the best lab in the world. Like, he's a friend of mine, and then I went And I told this to my doctor one day, and he was like, wait, you know a guy who runs a lab at the Mayo Clinic, a fish lab? And I'm like, yeah, like, of course I do. Like, I need to make sure this is under control. And I even said to my doctor when I first got diagnosed, I said, listen, if you were diagnosed with this, like, what doctor would you see? Like, I'm nothing against you, doc, but like, I want a second opinion. And, you know, if you were 30 and diagnosed with a cancer that most people don't get until they're 60, like, who would you want to see? And he's like, well, I mean, you could go to the University of Michigan. And I'm like, no, not I could. Who would you see if you could see any doctor in the world? And he named this doctor, Susan O'Brien. And he's like, well, you know, Susan O'Brien invented the treatment protocol for your disease. Like, she'd be a good doctor to see. And I go, great, I'm going to go see her. And he's like, I don't think she's taking new patients. And I'm like, she's taking me, you know. And then I did go see her twice, actually. And she told me the second time, you know, you really don't have to come see me because your doctor is doing exactly what I would be doing. And I go, okay, good. Because flying to Houston to MD Anderson over and over again, like, that's kind of expensive. But the point is, I did everything I could in my power to respond to the situation I was in. And it continues to today, right? That's why I focus on real estate. And when I got enough real estate that I could quit, I mean, I went from bankrupt to like retired in 7 years, which is awesome, right? When I got enough real estate that I could quit, I went, I should help other people do this because this is freaking amazing. And so I started my shows and started telling my story, you know, from podcasts, from the stage and it all came because I realized that it helped people. And then, you know, just everything I do now is about trying to figure out how to provide that value and fit into that, you know, that most interesting man in the world, the way I define it. Right. So I do cool things like climb mountains and, you know, I spent a month in Puerto Rico this year. I mean, that was amazing. Yeah. And, you know, a month in Africa last year. I mean, think about that. 2020. Who do you know went traveling in 2020 for a month? Yeah. Now, granted, I got lucky because I went in February right before the pandemic, but I mean, it was amazing. I spent time in Ethiopia and I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I mean, that's just amazing stuff to do. And it's stuff that 10 years ago, I would have never been able to afford or even think about doing. Right. And now I live my life like if something sounds cool, it's like, what would the most interesting man in the world do? He'd go climb Mount Kilimanjaro and he wouldn't wait until the best time. He would just be like, I'm going to do it next year at this time. And that's what I did. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about the vehicle that's helped provide some of that you have created. You mentioned before that you've got, you know, apartment units in partnerships. And you mentioned that to me before when we spoke before the show. Yeah. I consider myself like a rugged individualist. And what I feel like I'm teaching people mostly is to be like self-sufficient and stuff. And so I find that I kind of shy away from it, but I know that you love it and get a lot out of it. Like, talk to me about why do you love partnerships?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've never done it different. So, I mean, I could be completely wrong. Maybe I would love individual stuff, but every time I put something under contract to buy, and I think I'm going to buy it myself, right? I end up thinking, I want to help someone out. Like, for example, I have this duplex that I'm about to close on. I don't normally buy duplexes, but this one's a really good deal. And I was telling a friend of mine about it, and he was like, oh, I'd like to do something like that sometime. And I was like, well, let's just split it, right? So part of partnering with people is it's a way for me to help them get involved. They're going to feel more comfortable. But another part of it is like, my friend, he's a lawyer and he doesn't have a lot of real estate experience, but he makes really good money. So he might be able to get better terms than me. So there's a synergy there, right? Like, I don't have income. Like, I have negative income according to the IRS. I mean, that's silly, but that's the way that depreciation works. Right. And so if I try to get like a conventional mortgage, it's impossible. I can get like 20-year AMs and like 20% down, but like people that have W-2 income can get, 30-year AMs and lower interest rates and stuff, right? So there's a synergy there by partnering with him on that particular deal. And I use that as an example, but in reality, if you structure your agreements correctly and, you look at a partnership like a marriage, right? Something that's long-term, and you want to be really clear about your responsibilities and your obligations and all that. And you want to be sure everyone's on the same page before you get involved in it. But if you do those things appropriately, you get the advantage of all those synergies. Some people have more money than time. Some people have more time than money. Some people are good at finding deals. Some people are good at financing deals. Some people are good at managing deals. And so for me, I've partnered with property managers on a regular basis. In fact, my two main partners are both own property management companies. Mm-hmm. One of them's in Michigan, one of them's here in Tennessee, where I live. And not coincidentally, I buy most every piece of real estate that I buy either in Michigan or in Tennessee. And even ones that I'm not partnering with them, like this duplex, for example, they manage it, right? Like this one's in North Georgia, right near Tennessee. And I guarantee you that my partner, Brian, his property management company will manage this duplex for me. It's not going to be me trying to do it because I'm bad at managing. And I've tried that before and it hasn't worked out well because I'm like not good at it. And so I feel like, yes, I could just hire a property manager, right? But who's the best property manager? The person who has an ownership interest in something. So if you partner with a property manager, you get better results. Yeah. And I've developed amazing relationships like Brian, who I do my one podcast, Old Fashioned Real Estate, with. That partnership has brought me opportunities that I would never even considered. Like he was syndicating stuff. I didn't even know what a syndication was, right? And because we were partnering together, I learned all about that. And then, I think he would tell you if he was here that I've added a tremendous amount of value to his life because of the way that I think about things is unique. I mean, I have a background in law and an MBA, and I've spent literally decades thinking about real estate and trying to figure out how to do it. And then when I got sick and went bankrupt, I got started investing in real estate at a time when I had no credit, no money, and no experience, right? And also the economy was crashing because it was 2010 and the whole world was falling apart. And I was like, I'm going to have to figure this out. So I have a different perspective on real estate investing than almost anyone I know because of that. And so, I can provide value to him. He can provide value to me. And it's the same thing with my partner, Travis, who's got the property management company in Michigan. We each have our own skill sets. We each have our own ways of looking at things. And that synergy really makes us both better off. Yeah. And that's why I like partnering. And there's nothing against doing it on your own, but you don't know what you don't know. Right. And so I would say, try partnering and see what you think. And it's not for everyone. Like bad partnerships are worse than no partners for sure. So you want to be really careful about how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. So one of the questions I had written down on my pad before, was like, how does thoughtfulness apply in partnerships? And I feel like the answer that I took away from that was kind of just being really, really thoughtful, deliberate, intentional about creating those synergies or seeing how different puzzle pieces fit together, where the uniquenesses of what you bring to the table and what they bring to the table are very carefully considered, and you're creating value for them. They're creating value for you. And, it seems it's about, the synergistic effect of 1 + 1 = 3 kind of.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, the other areas I think where thoughtfulness really matters in partnerships is understanding what your goals are, right? Yeah. If you just want to buy a duplex or a few single family homes, you probably don't actually need a partnership. If you want to help people, right? The bigger your reach, the more people you can help, right? That's that value principle. The more value you add, the more you get in return. It's the same thing, right? You can give more if you have more, and it repeats itself. Yeah. And so to me, partnership allows people a way to scale, right? So if you want to help other people invest in real estate, you can do that by coaching. You can do that by having a show, and you do the show, and that's awesome, right? But you can also do it by literally partnering with them, because what's the best way to learn about real estate investing? To invest in real estate, right? Like just go do it. And not everyone's going to go do it. But you know what? My friend who I'm buying this duplex with, he likes real estate. He talks about real estate. He asks me questions about real estate, never buys any real estate. right? He's got his own house. He makes good money. He's comfortable, but he would like to buy real estate. So his first real estate investments were in syndications that I put together. And this is a natural evolution for him. We buy this property together, and he owns half of it with me. It gets him into that realm of thinking about real estate differently. And I can really add value to his life by helping him see it's not that hard. And he can learn what he doesn't know. And then maybe in an ideal world, like, yeah, I'd love to have some stuff by where he lives that we invest in together. But I'm equally happy if he finds some duplex or single family house and does the numbers and it works good and he goes and buys it himself, because that means he's transitioned away from being dependent on that. And by the way, I think that will happen, or we'll end up partnering on stuff, and there are advantages to both. And like I said, to me, there's a lot of value that's added by partnering. And, someday maybe I'll buy something on my own that's not my own house. I really do. Like, it's sort of in the back of my mind that I should do that someday just to see what that's like. Yeah. Because, hundreds of transactions and I've never ended up buying anything on my own. Yeah. I've tried a couple of times, but then I've ended up buying it with someone else anyway.
So we got a couple minutes left. I was thinking a great way to wrap it up is if you wouldn't mind just telling us about you. You have 2 podcasts.
I do.
Which are completely different, both of which hit on your passions in different ways. And I'd love for people to check them out. Can you give us a quick commercial on each of the 2?
Yeah. So I'll start with the real estate one since it's a real estate show. So it's called Old Fashioned Real Estate. And it's literally a little bit tongue in cheek. It's like the bourbon drink, old fashioned. So it's just bourbon and bitters and sugar. So what we do is we get on YouTube and we drink old fashions and we talk about real estate. Sometimes we interview guests, but mostly it's us pouring a single drink and talking about a specific topic until we're done with that drink. So like 10 to 15 minutes of Brian and I talking about real estate. And we've had some amazing episodes where we talked about really specific things. And we've had some great guests. I mean, people like Harry Dent, the economic forecaster and prognosticator, people from Bigger Pockets and things like that. And then my favorite of all of our guests was a securities attorney by the name of Jillian Sidoti. And this is an amazing transition to my next show because I met Jillian when we interviewed her. And then we were talking after we did this interview, which is something that's great about drinking on an interview is that, it loosens everyone up a little bit. So we are chatting after the interview and I'm telling her a little bit about this Facebook group that I created called Last Life Ever and how I want to help people live the best version of their life. And that's why we started the first show, is to help people get into real estate investing. But then I kind of went, some people, don't want to be real estate investors, and living the best version of their life maybe doesn't have anything to do with real estate. So I'm telling Jillian this, and she says, that sounds really awesome. I'm going to join your Facebook group. And about 2 days later, she calls me up and I'm like, can't even believe that I'm talking to her because she was our first ever guest on the show. And she was Grant Cardone's attorney. So she was this super in my world, famous securities attorney that had all these important clients and stuff. And she says to me, I want to do a podcast with you. And I go, we just did my podcast. And she's like, no, I want to do a Last Life Ever podcast. And I was like, cool. Well, I already started recording one because I recorded one episode yesterday, but you know what? I'm going to throw that away and start over with you because you're super cool. And I would love to have a co-host. And so we started the show. And we actually had our first show the first day of the pandemic, like literally March 16th, the first day of the shutdown was our very first episode. And it's pivoted all over the place because of the pandemic and figuring it out. But it's been amazing because we've been able to talk to people doing amazing things, like people that are following their dreams. Like we interviewed, just coming to mind right now, we interviewed this lady who's a Broadway musician and like a beauty queen. We interviewed a guy who won a reality television show. We interviewed TJ Miller, the comedian from like Deadpool, right? And Silicon Valley on HBO. And that was an amazing interview talking about how his mindset got him to where he is. And then we interviewed some non-famous people too, like people that started charities. One guy actually named Jeff Holst, if you can imagine that, like literally the same name as me. The only time I've ever met anyone with my name, spelled the same and everything. I accidentally got an email for him, and that's how I ended up meeting him. And it seemed important, so I tracked him down. And when I tracked him down, I found out that he had started a charity helping people who were, who's like basically helping with water safety for children. And I found out that his son had actually drowned in a public pool when he was 7 years old. Wow. And his response to it was, we need to help other people, and not like shut down pools. Like, we need to help people by teaching kids to swim and teaching adults about water safety. And like, to respond to a tragedy like that, talk about radical responsibility. And his story is amazing. He talks about how the very last night, like, they never let their kids sleep in bed with them or anything. And the last night that his child was alive, he just felt compelled to go see him. And he went down, and his kid, Colin, looked at him and said, "Dad, I really want to sleep with you tonight." And he came up and snuggled with him. It makes me cry just thinking about it, right? Yeah. And he tells this story about, how he really believes that God was directing him that night to spend that time. And all of the people that have been saved because of him. And I mean, they help thousands of people a year with water safety. And so many people like that, those people that, one guy who lost his son in Afghanistan and started a charity for disabled veterans, and things like that. And he told us, talk about never have bad days. He said he was really depressed after his son died, and he couldn't move on, and it was really distracting him. And one day he woke up and said, "I have to find 3 positive things that came from my son's death before I can move on." And now he finds 3 positive things in every negative thing that happens to him. Wow. And I was like, holy cow, that's even better than my stuff. like I love this guy. And his name is Mike Pearson. If people want to look up that episode, that was another really great episode. But there's so many, like, every show we do, I'm like, holy cow, I want to hang out with this person. It just doesn't matter who it is. Yeah. Wow. Well, everybody listening, you've got 2 new podcasts to subscribe to, Last Life Ever and the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. Jeff, this is a one-of-a-kind conversation on racking up rentals. And I mean, I could keep going for another 6 hours on this conversation. We'll do another one sometime. It'll be fun. I would love that. Thank you so much for sharing, your perspective and your life wisdom and everything with us. I know this is going to be moving to a lot of people, like it is for me. So thank you so much. Yeah, I look forward to hearing from your audience. So feel free to reach out to me anytime. Thank you. Wow. I just feel inspired every time I talk to Jeff, listen to his podcasts, hear anything more about his story. It's really incredible, but his mindset, his perspective on things is infectious. And I'm so excited about the idea of giving up bad days. It's truly amazing. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. So that is it for today's episode of Racking Up Rentals. Again, show notes can be found at thoughtfulre.com/E115. Please do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app and rating and reviewing the show. I see every rating and review, and I am super grateful for them. Did you know that we have a Facebook group for thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs too? It's called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders, and we would love to have you join us there. Just go to group.thoughtfulre.com, and the magic of the internet will redirect you right to that page, and you can join. If you liked this episode, please take a screenshot of it and post that screenshot to Instagram. Tag us. We are at Thoughtful Real Estate. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur, signing off. Thanks for listening to Racking Up Rentals, where we build long-term wealth by being win-win deal makers. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal and solve the financing to unlock the profits.